Hello and welcome to the Beyond 6 Seconds podcast. I'm your host, Carolyn Keel, and on today's episode, I'm speaking with Tessa McEvoy. Tessa is autistic, has oral motor apraxia, and was recently diagnosed bipolar. She talks about her experiences on her popular Facebook page, Apraxia Story, and she has a new book called What Is It Like Living with Depression? She advocates for autistic, bipolar, abuse survivors, and apraxic individuals online. Tessa, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me on.
So everyone's on the same page. What is oral motor apraxia?
That is a really great question. Oral motor apraxia is a speech disability that keeps your mind from forming words correctly, and it can be really hard to have conversations because by the time you're able to speak, people have already moved on, and also because of my speech disorder, people consider me less intelligent and therefore innocent. So I've been definitely infantized, along with treated as way younger, treated as a child rather than a young adult.
Yeah, that sounds really frustrating. And I think it's great that you're helping to raise awareness online and bring a lot of people together who have apraxia or know someone in their lives who has apraxia, and also people who are autistic, because you're also autistic as well. So there's a community out there too. So what inspired you to start sharing your apraxia story online?
Back in 2020, I was on study abroad, and I was on study abroad. I thought that I was going to have a great trip since I just got done with pre-20th century art history, and the program was revolved around drawing in Italy, where we studied pre-20th century Italian art, and that actually immediately suckled me right in. Little did I realize that I was destined to a nightmare trip. When I arrived in Italy, the airline lost my suitcase. My teacher told me, "Tessa, you'd not tell me that you lost a suitcase." And I actually began crying because my teacher was scolding me, even though I told the airport security where my suitcase was, and I told the place I was staying where my suitcase was lost and that I should be arriving. The teacher was not having it. So I spent the next day stressed out because I not have my art supplies on, or the things I wanted from my suitcase. The next thing I know, my teacher was saying, "Tessa, if you can fly back to the United States tomorrow, would you?" And I'm like, "Nope, I'm staying in Italy because I'm actually enjoying the program." The teacher said, "Well, it doesn't seem like you're very capable because you don't seem to be able to read a map very well." And I'm like, "No, I have my phone and I have Google Translate." "Well, what if you lose your phone?" And I'm like, I speak enough Italian to read a map, and even if it takes me slightly longer, I'm able to get back to my apartment. "Well, you don't speak Italian." And so next thing you know, I was kicked out of Italy because I believe my teacher considered my speech disability a safety hazard, and she did not like that I was eating gluten in Europe, even though at the time I was gluten free in the United States. So, long story short, that's why I started Apraxia Story, because I was mostly depressed.
Yeah, that sounds rough. And I know you share a lot of personal experiences that you've been through and how you've struggled, and a lot of your struggles, including the one with the teacher, seems like really a lack of support in a lot of situations, being in very difficult situations and just not having a lot of support, not having a lot of people understand your speech disability or being even the slightest bit accommodating to
Yep.
to a lot of the challenges. Wow.
Yeah, and that teacher in that trip did give me PTSD.
Yeah, I can't even imagine being in a foreign country and facing those challenges.
I was actually kicked out of that program within 48 hours of landing.
Oh my God. So then you were back home, and at that point decided to start sharing more about your experiences there. And did you start on Facebook sharing those? Was your Facebook your first place?
I started on Facebook sharing. Originally, my Apraxia story was just going to be about the realities of being an apraxic individual. Then I actually really started tying in autism and like you're tying in like how autism and apraxia interplay, like for me personally, then because of like because of like my because of the pandemic, I did realize just how abusive my household was. So I actually started tying in what it's like to be an abuse survivor with disabilities.
Wow. Yeah. And I think it's important for stories like that to be shared because I think, many other people are in similar types of situations. A lot of people with disabilities, unfortunately, are even more vulnerable, especially during the pandemic when everybody's kind of stuck in the same place, in the same situation. And yeah, wow. So that is important for people to hear those stories. You mentioned you have apraxia, you're also autistic, and I know you kind of struggled really with both. It sounds like growing up your whole life, just not really being understood or supported. And that is a lot of what you talk about on your page as well. Is that correct?
That is correct. And what you're saying is really true because as an individual with a disability, there's people who actually said to me, Tessa, you need to deal with tough love. This is your family. You only have one family. And my family actually went as far as to tell me, Tessa, you are depressed. The abuse is all in your head. Even after years of years of getting my needs denied, and the fact that after I explained what was going on to me with my extended family, they still took my abuser aside.
Wow. Yeah, that's really, that's scary, honestly. So yeah, wow. You share a lot of those stories very candidly. And you've also been building a community through Facebook and also through like because you have a live stream show that's related to your Facebook page as well, called Apraxia Peeps, where you talk to people who also have apraxia or are autistic or have other disabilities to learn about their experiences as well. What kind of responses have you received from people who are either like reading your posts on Facebook about your experience or watching your videos?
That's a really good question to start. With my Facebook posts, I've been getting a lot of mixed response. I've been getting responses of people saying, oh my gosh, I can totally relate to autism and apraxia. And I've also been getting posts saying, Tessa, I came to your page just to see your apraxia post. Why are you trashing your mother? And then there's like another type of post that say, Tessa, you're never abused. You are bipolar and you're going crazy. Why should we ever trust somebody who is bipolar? And to top it up, you have a speech disorder. So I'm not sure who to believe, you or your mother.
Wow. And that is something that is a concern for people, who are neurodivergent, who are bipolar, who have speech disabilities, is that a lot of times, people assume that you're either not trustworthy or somehow just not reliable or not aware of reality. And for some reason, you're not believed when things happen to you.
Yeah, it is definitely a sad reality, especially like sometimes I'm really fresh out of my situation. And the fact that my mom, that fact, I won't say details specifically, but the fact that my mom is like a really high up professional, that does intimidate me. That does really intimidate me. And that's why for the longest time, I not share very much of what was going on. But I realized that if I stayed quiet, that other people may end up having to suffer in silence. And I just find that by telling my stories, just by being as open as I feel comfortable to, that it gets people, that does empower others to eventually say, even especially others with disabilities, that I have the power to stand up to my abusers.
You talk about this on your page about facing abuse from your family and also, taking a stand and moving away and really starting to break off those relationships, or at least distance yourself from the abusive relationships. So are you at this point kind of distant from your family or detached as you're in a safer place?
Yep, I'm distant and detached. And the hard thing is that there's people who actually are trying to defend my family and say Tessa, and they're like saying, Tessa, we like literally implying literally like implying, Tessa, we miss when your posts were more innocent. And when
Mm.
you just like posted like happy cartoon drawings and just like happy memes. But now since I'm like talking about, since I'm like really talking about my reality, I do find that people tend to be like way more critical, since like it's like definitely hitting nerves.
Wow. Yeah. Some people just can't deal with reading that and being exposed to that, but it's still really important. I mean, it's real. It's your real life, and you have an absolute right to share what's going on in your life. And I believe people really benefit from hearing what you share about your own experience, because I'm sure there are other people out there who can relate quite well to parts or all of your experiences.
Yes. Another thing I get like a lot of backlash on is the fact that I am adopted from China, and that in the United States there's this culture around how adopted children should be thankful for their mamas, especially like the mamas or like a parental figure, and how adopted kids should be thankful for the adopted family and like forever be grateful no matter what the family does, because your family literally in air quotes saved you from the bad realities of your other country, which I find, the more I think about it, really just like really disturbing within itself.
Yeah, that's a tough situation to be in as the person who's adopted, and feeling like you have to be grateful regardless of how your family treats you. That's a tough place to be. Wow.
It really is. And I was even told by one of my family members saying, you know, the only person who knows you for 22 years is your mama. And you're literally like your mama's arm. You're like your mom's appendix. And your mom needs you in her life right now. Right? You need to get back with your mom. Even after I told them even after I told them like what was going on and why I was like no longer wanting anything to do with her.
Wow. Yeah, trying to guilt you into going back with that relationship.
Lots of guilt.
Yeah.
And they said because you're like a very unique, like implying disability, your mom is the only one who can really save you from yourself.
That's got to be hard to constantly hear that language around you, kind of echoed by your family.
It really is, and that language has definitely taken a prominence on my Facebook page too, which is
Yeah.
why sometimes I find it so hard to go online.
Yeah, that's got to be tough.
It is.
Wow. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, when you post, you also, even with the lighthearted posts, but also with the tough, difficult posts, you usually have an illustration that you do along with that, usually of you in some sort of scenario that helps put together and illustrate the point of the post. So it's obvious from anyone who's been on the page for even a couple seconds that you have like a real talent for drawing as well as for writing. So yeah, how long have you been drawing or like illustrating like that?
Thank you so much for asking. I have been illustrating since I was 5 years old.
Oh.
Not sure what it was, but there was like something that just really clicked with me in drawing, and ever since then I've been drawing up to 3 hours a day. That's what got me really into illustrating and for writing. I actually had this pre-20th century art history art history one teacher who actually taught me how to like really write and refine my vocabulary. That's when I really got into writing, was after that class.
That's great. Yeah. And you also, speaking of writing, you also just published I think it's your first book, but you've got a brand new book out right now. And I think it also has illustrations that you've done in there as well. Is that correct?
That is correct. I'm actually beyond excited, and I still can't believe that I actually published my very first book. Not my very first book, but my very first book on like where I did it both, where I came up with the concepts, the writing, and the illustrations on my own.
Right.
I'm like just like so glad that this book is actually done by me, and I just want that, and I'm just like beyond thrilled that I did not have any help from family on this book.
Tell us about the book. It's called What Is It Like Living with Depression?
So this book is about what it's like living with depression, and like how I can suddenly go from feeling super duper happy to kaboom.
Mm-hmm.
I just feel downright miserable. I can barely move. I go catatonic. And the book's like about like my book's about like how I deal with advice, and like what I do whenever somebody tries to tell me to journal, to do yoga, and to do meditation, which is like very common advice to hear. And I also, and my main point of the book It's like sometimes that you just need a listening ear without any advice attached.
Yeah, absolutely. How long did it take you to write the book?
It actually took me a week to start and finish, including illustrations and
Wow.
formatting and stuff before I sent it off to the formatter. I actually watched an entire season of this Netflix show called Blown Away, where I just sat down my iPad doing my entire book for a week.
Oh, wow. That's amazing that you wrote it in a week and illustrated it in a week. That's so cool. Yes, the focus, I guess, from the title is mainly around depression and your experience with that. But you were recently diagnosed as bipolar, and I know you started to write posts about what manic episodes feel like for you as well. I know the diagnosis of bipolar is pretty recent, but did getting that diagnosis, did it explain things, or was the realization that like, oh, these feelings I were having were manic episodes in addition to the depression? Was that like a new realization?
It was actually both. I was like, finally, I have a diagnosis to explain what was going on. And at first, I was like downright shocked. I not think of myself as bipolar. The doctor did point out that I talked really fast and that I would spend like hours every day journaling and like writing and producing a lot of art in the psych world. And then when I thought back to when I was younger, like around 5 years old, around 8, I'd actually spend like 5 hours a day just sitting there drawing nonstop, and my ideas kept coming out so fast that I did not have any time to add color. So the mania does explain why I produce art so quickly in high volumes.
Wow. Yeah, so it's good to have at least those answers in that context and understand why things work out that way. Wow.
Yes, it
Yeah.
was like it was just like really eye opening.
Yeah, I bet. Wow. So yeah, and that is really exciting that now you've got your book out. And I'll put a link in the show notes so that people can order it from Amazon. Is that the best place to get it, on Amazon right now?
That is the best place, and I also want to have a absolutely huge shout out to SLP mommy of Apraxia and Dyspraxia, because she was the one who actually helped me get the book uploaded due to the fact that I don't have a laptop, and I just can't thank her enough just for like all the help and support in the process.
Oh, that's great. You've been through so much and you share so much of your story so honestly and candidly, and I know people are out there finding comfort and just sort of realizing that they're not alone when they read your experiences. I don't know if you would have any advice or counsel for people who are resonating with your content.
Yeah, to start with, I will start with Apraxia.
Mhm.
Apraxia can be one of the hardest ones I find. Like for me, like Apraxia is the hardest one because of how people often judge me for my intellect, and the fact that I really struggled to make friends made me even more isolated and more likely to be abused. So with Apraxia, I just like literally found I like find it so hard to like actually, yeah, I find it so hard to like, make friends or like any connections in the world, because instead of like getting the lead with my strength, I'm like leading with my weakness, my voice. So yeah, the best advice would be and my best advice would be just to not sugarcoat anything. I do find it really hard, like whenever like somebody's like telling me, saying like it's gonna be okay, it's gonna be okay, you're gonna get through this. I do understand that I will eventually get that my speech will eventually improve. Yet it's like so hard because it's like still really hard to communicate as of now, and it can and sentiments can be honestly just like downright depressing within themselves. So it'll be like years of like fighting to get like the support you need. There's like a lot of like reject and isolation.
Yeah. And then in terms of, I guess, people who know, have people in their lives who have apraxia or any speech disability, really, it sounds like, you know, I guess I would counsel people to just be patient, because I would imagine it's really frustrating if someone's trying to like finish your sentences, or like, as you were sort of just demonstrating now, like, trying to comfort you and you're just trying to talk. So I don't know if you have any sort of counsel for people, like how you would want people to behave or give you space when you're speaking so that it's just easier for you to communicate verbally.
Yeah, what I would like is for people to know is for people to actually give me like enough time to even like repeat myself, and that I will eventually get to a point. I've actually had teachers in classrooms cut me off because I was like saying the same thing 3 times trying to get to like, do my main point. And another thing is it's just to understand that even though my voice may come off as immature, that I'm still able to understand, process everything that's going on, and I still do have needs, desires, wishes, and wants in my life.
Yeah, that's good advice. And I hope more people do that and give that space. Absolutely. Do you have any other big goals around your online advocacy or even around your art or your writing?
Yeah, my biggest goal right now is to get my is to market my book and my online advocacy, because I do feel, because like just like being able to share my story to others is like such a great feeling. And I just like want to like help, and I also want to like help others like break down, just like to break down stereotypes of bipolar, autism, and apraxia. I also want to help destigmatize. I also really want to help other abuse survivors know that the stories are true, even if people label them as like manic, depressed, and even if people say, and even like if people say like that the stories are invalid because of the mental condition. I want people to be able to walk away knowing that the stories are true and that the reality is valid.
Yeah, that's really powerful and will help a lot of people, especially a lot of people who are in very difficult situations. And it's just good, as you were saying earlier, to have someone who can listen to you and truly listen and just be able to talk freely without feeling like you're going to be interrupted or judged or anything like that.
Yes.
So, what's the best way for people to connect with you? Probably your Facebook page is the best place for people to find you. Is that right?
That is correct. The best way to contact me is Apraxia Story. APRAXIA Story. Apraxia Story.
Okay, cool. I'll put a link to your page, the Apraxia Story page, in the show notes so people can click on it and they can find it there that way too.
Thank you so much.
Thanks again, Tessa, for being on my show. Is there anything else that you'd like our listeners to know or anything that they can help or support you with?
That's a really great question. What I wish for people to know is that somebody's disability does not determine their intellect. And even if somebody presents, like in air quotation marks, as something different, or if you present as in a way that you may not be, that you may, from your upbringing, may not be used to, is to please respect that they are human. Please know that they're trying the hardest, and please do not automatically assume that they're on drugs or some sort of substance, because that's a really harmful stereotype, especially if law enforcement gets involved. That's actually one of my fears, is like somebody mistaking my rocking, my flapping, my chanting as if I'm on drugs and getting the police called on me and arrested. That's actually one of my biggest fears about going into public. Another thing I wish people to know is that even if I do sound, in quotation marks, young for my age, that I'm actually able to think for myself, and therefore I should be treated as an autonomous, independent adult.
Yeah, absolutely. It's important to realize that sometimes disabilities look like other things and it's not. You can't make that assumption.
Yep. Yeah, I just like find it like really saddening how people how sometimes I see people actually laughing or pointing at somebody, and it actually really hurts my heart, because throughout my entire life I have been bullied, laughed at, and pointed at, and that's why I have such a hard time making any friends.
Yeah, that happens way, way too often with kids and adults, and there's really no excuse for that. And yeah, I'm sorry that happened. It wasn't right, and I'm glad that you have now a community of people. I guess that's one good thing about the online world, is that we can connect with more people who maybe have a more shared understanding or just different abilities to empathize. Yes. And listen to us. Yeah, absolutely.
Definitely. Yeah, the online world has like really opened up like a lot of like new friendships, and just being able to connect with people like online really does keep my spirits up, even in spite of like the trolls, and in spite of people like blatantly denying my abuse. There's like so many good things that happen online.
Mm-hmm. And your Facebook page is one of those good things that's bringing a lot of hope and connection to people. So yeah, thank you for all of the work that you do and your advocacy and sharing your creativity and your story with all of us online. So thank you for that. And thanks for being on my show. I really, really enjoyed talking with you.
You're very welcome. and I really appreciated getting interviewed by you.